We're now into Module 4, our second lecture, and we're looking at trolling and hate speech on social media. 2 chapters of your textbook apply to this topic area. One is Chapter 7, The Fine Line Between Opinion and Bigotry, and Chapter 9, Big Brother and You, Censorship Hotspots and Security Laws. Today we'll start by having a quick look at your learning problem. We'll be looking at the topic of cyber bullying and trolls, considering discrimination and hate speech, looking at freedom of speech, that concept, freedom of expression, and censors the world over, and a quick look at anti-terror laws since the September 11 attacks in 2001. Well, the learning problem this week is fair and square in this area of hate speech and discrimination, with a little twist of copyright in there as well, as we learned last week. I won't read through the whole learning problem, but it's to do with anti-Islam material that is produced in a political context as a political tool, and you will need to examine that and try to extract the various elements from these 2 weeks of readings. I direct you particularly to the hate speech and discrimination laws that might apply in your jurisdiction. As I mentioned, the moral rights or the copyright attached to that, but also anti-terror laws that might factor in depending on what you are, the latter parts of the problem seem to start to venture into that area. As usual, we'll work to those learning problem questions, which I won't repeat this week, but you can see them there on those 2 slides, and I'd refer you to the PowerPoint slides which are under content on the site. Please go onto the discussion board and talk about those learning problem discussion questions, because they're crucial to your understanding, both for the learning problem but also for your learning journal as you compile that, and we're heading there very shortly, and finally towards your social media policy critique that you'll be doing at the end of the course. Well, we hear these terms bandied around, cyberbullying and trolling and cyber stalking, and one wonders what they mean. Well, we're not as concerned about specific definitions of each in this course. It really is antisocial behaviour on what is meant to be social media. One Australian case from 2011 is used as a point of focus in your text, and that was the case of Bradley Hampson. Sadly, an autistic individual, but nevertheless who knew enough about the law to have already broken the law in this area previously. But this was a very sad case where he seemed to get some satisfaction out of going online to tribute sites which were memorials to children who had been murdered or had died in tragic circumstances, and writing all sorts of terrible comments on these sites and putting pornographic images on these sites when they were meant to be a memorial site for the deceased children. Well, he was detected through various investigative means. Anonymity is very hard to preserve in the criminal realm because the government agencies have all sorts of powers and techniques for detecting offenders in this area. But he was charged under a range of offences, the main one being the Australian federal offence of misuse of a carriage service, which is a telecommunications service. Other offences that arise in this sort of... by the way, Hampson was jailed. Being his second offence in this area, he was jailed for this behaviour, which shows you the extent of the consequence that can happen for people misusing social media. As well as those federal telecommunications offences, there are a whole host of criminal offences at state or territory level in most parts of the Western world, including even assault, the threat of an assault, depending on the words that are used in the trolling, stalking and harassment laws, criminal defamation if they're saying really nasty things about you publicly, These laws are still in operation in many parts of the Western world. And depending on the sort of threat they're making against you, say for example they're threatening that unless you give them money or do some sort of action that perhaps they would post some private images of you or something like that, then blackmail or extortion laws come into play. And these are very serious offences with lengthy jail terms attached to them. There are alternative measures to the legal measure you can take. I'm not suggesting you wouldn't report a crime if it was that serious, but I mentioned in the last lecture some recommended approaches by our federal government here in Australia of reporting and blocking and ignoring material. So, and of course seeking counselling along the way. So please go back there and review that if you need that revision. As far as discrimination and hate speech laws go, these do vary internationally, as do the cultural approaches to what we might say about people of different religions or races. The Danish cartoons case study in the book is a prime example, because here, Denmark, being one of the countries at the top of the various press freedom indexes, allows its media to say all sorts of things which might cause upset or horror in other countries and cause other people to become violent. We saw that only recently as well in the Charlie Hebdo incident in Paris, which had a similar fact scenario as a background to it. But there are other parts of the world where what you publish could be highly offensive, and in those two cases it was particularly offensive to the Islam religion. And there are sections of Islam that found them so offensive that they would threaten, and in the Charlie Hebdo case actually carry out murderous actions as a result. So we find this diversity, and with the internet being a multi-jurisdictional platform, what you publish here can find its way elsewhere where people have other views about the publication. We can see there, and I won't repeat them, but both at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, there are articles that protect against discrimination and hate, and I'd suggest you look more closely at those. The US First Amendment goes the other way and actually protects hateful speech through a whole series of court decisions, mainly over the last half century. But the US has taken its free speech so far that people can actually say quite racist things about others, in some cases very violent things, as the textbook explains, short of actually making a direct threat of violence in a racist context. It will normally be protected by First Amendment protections there. Of course, it's not just race and it's not just religion, but there are many other discriminatory type of postings you can find on social media. Misogynist, anti-women postings, anti-gay, and across a whole range of topic areas. We also find hate speech or inappropriate speech protected under other laws. There are laws of indecency and obscenity that apply. There are blasphemy laws that are applied in some countries with blasphemy against the Islam religion under Sharia. In some Western countries, there are blasphemy laws against blaspheming or defaming the Christian religion and Jesus Christ. And in some countries, such as Thailand, we will learn in a moment about some other laws that apply there. As far as free expression, free speech, free media, the standards of this vary markedly across the world. If you go to Freedom House's website or to Reporters Without Borders, you will see their various international media freedom indexes. And you'll see a whole continuum there from countries mainly around Northern Europe and Scandinavia that have a high level of free expression right through to various countries which have regimes which jail and torture and kill journalists for doing their work, and dissidents and satirists, bloggers and social media users for posting criticisms or satirical material on social media. I have written a blog, and there's a chapter in your book called The First Amendment Doesn't Have a Passport. And what I'm trying to get at there is that we might come from a Western democracy with relatively high levels of free expression, but we've got to remember with the internet, our work might be transported to places that do not have as high a standard of free expression. Now, in an extreme case like Charlie Hebdo or the Danish cartoons, there might be people in those other countries who come looking for you in your home country. In extreme criminal cases, things to do with child pornography or massive commercial level copyright breaches, international police, Interpol, might collaborate, and police you might be arrested in one country for having published such material on the internet into another country. So we have to be aware of what we do on the internet, because while internationally, as you see there, everyone has the right to freedom of expression and opinion, it doesn't apply on all aspects everywhere, because countries enforce this in their own ways. The international variations are quite marked, and as I mentioned a moment ago, Thailand has these lèse-majesté laws which protect against defamation of the royal family. Any published criticism of the royal family could be subject to these laws in Thailand. And we've had many foreign citizens arrested in Thailand and thrown into jail for publishing material which might be insulting to the royal family. The area of national security or anti-terror laws is a very important one, because we're finding an encroachment into free expression across most countries on the excuse or the reason that national security requires tougher measures, more clampdown on the press and on free expression on social media. Since 9/11, in most Western democracies, this has resulted in increased surveillance powers of the authorities, detention and questioning regimes that did not exist prior, various no-go zones where journalists, for example, can't tread because they are deemed to be national security sites, reporting restrictions, exposure of confidential sources through surveillance and data analysis, metadata retention and accessibility for the authorities, and new offences of associating with certain people who might be considered terrorists and publishing material about them. So this leads to these very important discussion questions that I would like you to jump onto the discussion board to talk about. What laws apply to cyberbullying in your jurisdiction? Which methods do you think are most effective? How should racist or bigoted remarks be handled by a social media moderator? You might have that role. How might the laws of repressive regimes affect your travel plans if you've been blogging about these sorts of things? And which anti-terror laws might impact upon your work in your jurisdiction, or perhaps anti-terror laws from another jurisdiction that might affect you with your work or travel? So today we've looked at these disturbing areas of cyberbullying, trolling, hate speech and censorship, and the range of rights and laws that are involved. And these really feed into our learning problems and our learning journal and our discussion on the discussion board. So please do that. And also on your discussion board, decide on your position as far as those discussion questions go that we just looked at. And don't forget to jump onto the MLGriff hashtag to tweet some recent examples of any of these. I'm keen to see them, as I'm sure other students of media law are. Until next week, bye for now.